Hello again, everyone, and welcome to my channel. Let's talk about us with Uche. Please, before we get started, as usual, if you're new to my podcast, make sure to download, subscribe, share with your friends and family. And if you're new to my YouTube channel, please make sure to download, subscribe, like, comment, and please hit that bell notification so that anytime I upload a video, you'll be the very first to be notified. So today I'm going to be talking about sex, sexuality, sexual orientation, bisexuality, the Kinsey scale, and also I'm going to be talking about sexual compatibility. And to help me dissect this topic, I'm going to be on a phone interview with one of my really good friends that lives in Africa. So please stay tuned.
Hello, everyone. This is Uche, and I am here with a really good friend of mine, Mr. Ryan. I've known him a little bit over a year, and he is by far one of the smartest people I've ever met in life. And we talk all the time. He definitely has inspired me a lot. I like to think that the inspiration is a two-way street, but Ryan is here with me to talk about this particular subject that I've been meaning to talk for a while. So, Mr. Ryan, could you please give us a quick introduction of yourself?
Hey, well, thanks for that introduction yourself. Yeah, my name is Ryan. Right now I work in an educational nonprofit that works with essentially students in rural areas. Born and raised in rural New Hampshire. And yeah, I definitely benefit a lot from my conversations with Uche. I think we find a lot of common interest in discussing the human fallacies and the way that those like manifest themselves in the world. So yeah, I look forward to this.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ryan. Thank you very much for jumping on the call with me tonight. I know it's really late over in Africa right now. I think we're like 7 or 8 hours behind. So thank you very much
Mm,
for sacrificing your evening. I know you usually relaxing and getting ready for the next day. So thank you. So today, like I talked to you, we discussed earlier, we're going to be talking about sex and sexuality. I do want to start with talking about sexuality in general. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is because for something, me personally, I like to think that sex is something that is inherent. It's a natural human thing. We're all sexual beings, for the most part. I understand that some people are asexual, and on the spectrum of asexuality, I'm going to be talking about later on. But for the most part, we're sexual beings. We get horny, so to speak. We reproduce. We feel like we want to have sex, not just for reproduction, but also for pleasure. But for something that is so natural, sex has become a thing of taboo, and it's something that is quite like a global thing, which is quite ironic considering the obvious fact that we're all sexual beings. So I want to talk about sex and talk about some of the things that a lot of people ignore, a lot of people don't pay attention to, or a lot of people are hush hush about because it's considered taboo. Me personally, I think that sex is there's no black or white when it comes to sex. There's it's sexuality as a whole is a spectrum. There's no one particular way of a person has to be, sexual or not even sexual. That's just the way I think of it. Different folks, different things. I like to think that the first thing of attraction is that you don't even know what it is about somebody else that you're attracted to. You don't know what it is about you that somebody else finds you attractive. Um, where we find different things attractive, we find different we're all inclined in different sexual behavior, so to speak. So I want to talk about all of that, the entirety of sexuality, and discuss with you because I feel like you're one of the best people to talk about this with, the entirety of sexuality. A lot of people are hush hush about.
yeah, I look forward to this conversation. Obviously, like uh, I lived a lot of my young adulthood in spaces that were much more like liberal and open about discussing these topics, and at least like being at least more open in your relationships and in
Hmm.
public about how people navigate these. And then I've spent the last couple of my years entering spaces where that has been like very much the opposite. So definitely have a lot of thoughts brewing.
Okay. Yeah, it's also for me, coming from Nigeria, coming from Africa, I was born and raised in a traditional, conservative, super religious, household. So there was definitely no sex talk.
Mm,
Sex was taboo. It's one of those don't bring girls home, don't bring boys home type of situation, you know. So it's sort of like one of those things, which I
Mm.
personally I think is very dangerous. I think that sex education is very important for your children because again, we're sexual beings, you know, and if you don't talk to them about it, eventually they'll figure it out, and that's the dangerous part because you don't know where they're getting the information from. Yeah, you know, it could be from the wrong sources. People who are looking to take advantage of them and so on. So to begin with, I do want to start with the Kinsey scale. I remember back in college, I learned about the Kinsey scale. For anyone who is not familiar with the Kinsey scale, it's basically a scale that goes from 0 to 6, talking about sexuality in terms of heterosexuality or homosexuality. 0 being 100% heterosexual and 6 being 100% homosexual. Kinsey did say that he claimed that most people lie between 1 and 5, and very small minority of people lie at exactly 0
Mm.
and exactly 6. I genuinely believe that. I do believe that most people lie between 1 and 5, and that is a spectrum of bisexuality. I do believe that majority of people in the world, if you take away bias, if you take away religion, if you take away conformity, societal influence, culture, and the list goes on. I do believe that a lot of people, most people on the planet, lie between 1 and 2, a spectrum of bisexuality. To further elaborate that, on a scale from 10%, it's well 0% to 100%. I believe that there are people who are, let's say, 10% gay and 90% straight, or 90% gay and 10% straight, and then everybody else falls in between the line. What do you think about that? And feel free to disagree, by the way.
Uh,
These are just my thoughts based on my research.
no, I have the same belief where essentially if you view it as a spectrum, like the ends are the least populated, and you can almost just like almost how everything falls in the natural world, it has a bell curve where most people are falling somewhere in the middle. And I think the issue with this is that that data is never really going to be able for us to currently get in the modern world because of the way that people want to identify publicly or even privately. Um, there is a book written, I'm not going to do justice to the author, but I think it's called Everybody Lies. It's about big data and what big
Mm,
data was able to tell us about the human world. And it told us that, like, if you went into a population and you, like, went around and you asked people to privately put in their responses to, like, how they would identify sexually, the number of straight is obviously super, super high. But then when you go and you do Google incognito search
mm,
histories of all the computers in that community, it does not match those numbers at all. Where clearly, like, the
mm,
rates of like gay porn searches are like super, super high in these communities that are supposedly like 95, 96% straight. So I believe in the bell curve for this. I just don't really think it's verifiable at this point.
mm. Why do you think that is, though? Like, why a lot of people feel like when you ask a group of people, a large number of people of their sexuality, obviously a lot of them are going to identify as heterosexuality, because that's the norm, you know, being in a heteronormative world, you know, that's considered norm. But why is it that people go against their nature to lie, to hide something that is very natural for them? And I'm saying this because I've also witnessed this in some very respectable people. You know, I've met some men, even women, but mostly men who are well educated, well confident, well spoken, you know, opinionated. But when it comes to their sexuality, these people are not, I know them that they're not heterosexual at all. Maybe not even homosexual, but a different type of sexuality. But when it comes to their sexuality, they fear of being reviewed as or viewed as gay or anything other than straight. What do you think that is? What do you think that's coming from, that pressure?
Uh, I feel like for me that comes in like two different buckets. I think the first one is just what happens when you deal with socially constructed definitions. Um, we have like such delineated like what it means to be gay and what it means to be straight as being something that you abide by like 100% as soon as it happens. So I have a feeling that I don't even think it's that necessarily people are lying. I think sometimes people don't even really know. And to be honest, I get brought back to
Mm,
the documentary on the Tiger King, where I can't even remember his name, but the Tiger King was essentially talking to this man that he was interested in who said he was straight, and the Tiger King was like, well, do you watch straight porn? Do you like when it's a big dick or a small dick? If you like a big dick, like, you're also gay. And it's just, I don't know, I think we have all these walls put up about what it means to be gay and what it means to be straight. And in reality, it's much more fluid than that. So I think that's one. It's just like, if we had looser definitions of what that meant, or if there weren't even definitions at all, like, I think people would actually be willing to self-identify more.
I like that.
Not even honestly.
I like
Yeah.
that. I like that reference. And sorry to cut you off. Going back to the LGBT as a large, one of the things I've always talked to people about is the problem with the LGBTQ is the LGBTQ. You know what I mean? I think that these people, like the L and the G and the B and the T and Q, are all grouped together unjustly. It shouldn't be. They shouldn't be one group. You know what I mean? So you have the heterosexual community, and then you have the other. You know, so the heterosexuality is the norm, and then everybody else is the other, the anomaly, and you group them together because to the rest of the heteronormative society, we don't know what to do with these people, so you group them together. But the problem with grouping these people together is because when you group LGBTQ together, the general umbrella is gay. You know, apart from lesbians or lesbian cis women who are obviously women, you know, everybody else, there's this gay connotation, and people don't like to be associated with that gay connotation because a lot of these people in the LGBTQ are actually not gay. For example, bisexuals is not gay. And I think it's quite disrespectful to call somebody who's bisexual gay, you know, because if you're saying that a person who is bisexual, a person who is honestly bisexual, by the way, because I know there's a lot of bullshitters out there, a person who is honestly bisexual, right? If you say that they are gay, by the same logic, they are straight as well. But it's not true because a bisexual person goes both ways. Now, of course, depending on what spectrum of bisexuality that person lies on, you know, they're going to lean more to people of the opposite sex or over people of the same sex, you know, and vice versa. But I do think that's a problem. You know, a lot of people don't want to be associated. A lot of the members of the LGBTQ who are not gay are constantly being associated as being gay, and that messes with their, you know, their self-understanding, especially more so because there's not a lot of positive representation of the LGBTQ anywhere. Apart from maybe recently, you know, in the media, but then even at that in media, I like to think that entertainment or media is not the healthiest form of education for anything, you know, because they set unrealistic standards and, you know, their views on everything is quite deceptive. It's more so entertainment and not reality. So because a lot of LGBTQ people, especially young people, including old people, we don't have a lot of outlet. We don't have a lot of people talking about LGBTQ in a positive light. You look at the media for answers, and it's quite deceptive. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So a person who is actually bisexual, right? A person who is actually bisexual, but doesn't necessarily understand their bisexuality because that person is also, let's say, a bisexual man, right? He is also attracted to women. You know, he feels good with the women. He's dated women. He gets, you know, he gets off with women, but then he also gets off with men. And then he looks at the image that is being portrayed by, let's say, Hollywood for gay men, you know, flamboyant, makeup, girly, you know, feminine, and blah blah blah. And he doesn't identify with that. That messes with his sense of self identity. You know what I mean? Because to him, that's not who he is. And I feel like this was also mentioned back in that documentary with Aaron Hernandez when he was talking about how he couldn't accept that he's gay because his understanding of gay doesn't conform to that image of gayness, you know, being
Mm.
flamboyant, being this. He's a tall, hunky man, plays football, you know, very masculine, and there's no way in hell he was going to identify as something that just does not conform to his self-identity. So I think that's a problem, you know, on its own. The whole LGBTQ being grouped together as gay, but gay people are just one, well, when I say gay, I'm talking about like, they say men who identify sexually with people sleeping with men of, you know, cisgendered men for the most part. You know, that's what I mean by gay. So the LGBTQ, with the exception of lesbian women who are for the most part cisgendered women, right, are grouped as gay. And I think that's a problem. What do you think about that?
I think I think my brain goes in two directions again. And the first being just like going back to the history of like when all those letters got pushed together, it was just like a very politicized move, um, in which you had people who could look to each other and be like, maybe our causes will strengthen one another. But at the same time, we know that there are factions within that group that were more a part of that relationship, almost as like frenemies of like, you'll get me there for now, but I don't dig your politics, and I'm like out the second like things are good for me. Where like there was more bonding on being uncomfortable and marginalized in spaces, and once that got better for some people, they were willing to like ditch back out. So I feel like that's like one thing of just like those. It's really like what would have happened if that wasn't the move that needed to be made. Like if all these different people who identify as queer in their own ways didn't feel the need to come together, like how would it actually look now? I think the second thing is also just like human nature of, especially in young adulthood, late childhood, like there's such a need to form to a community, to people that you think you can identify with and be like. And I feel like that just makes it hard when there's the majority of people in the world that are straight, and then the minorities of subcultures you find are so few. So when you can identify in yourself that you don't identify sexually as the people around you, and then you start looking at subcultures and there just aren't that many, I think there is a push to conform to one that you feel like you can most fit into. I mean, that is where people like Aaron Hernandez fall in between, where they're like, I can't fit into either of these. And who's to say like what that does to the human psyche? But I also bet you there are a lot of people who act the way they do right now, not because that's naturally who they are, but that's because the culture of what they fell into. And I would say like that's something that I think about a lot of, just like especially when we think about bisexual people, there's a lot of lack of modeling in the world of what that looks like, because there's such a push to pick a side. So when bisexual people are trying to look out into the culture, the subcultures, and figure out where they belong, I don't necessarily know if they find it. I don't think they find like people who are bisexual in nature and they understand how they fit there. I think they also get stuck in between.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. You identify as bisexual, correct?
Yes.
On a scale from 0 to 6, with the whole Kinsey scale thing, 0 considering being 100% heterosexual and 6 being 100% homosexual, where would you say you lie?
Hmm. I think it also, just being like a cultural being, I think it has fluctuated. I want to say now, and it's definitely contextualized by like the relationships I'm in now and like all the things going on. I think I'm at like a 4.75.
4.7. Okay.
4.75.
Okay. Between 2 and 4, it's still pretty average. Yeah, it's still sort of like in the middle. Okay. So it's definitely fluctuated. What's the lowest it's fluctuated? And
Oh,
what
the
has influenced this fluctuation?
Hmm. Okay, I feel like there's a lot to unpack here. I would say like growing up, I never, probably until like high school, I never had doubts that I wasn't. Oh, I think at that time it was 0. Like I think that was just like what was kind of pushed onto you. I don't think there were many other options. Um, and then I think when I was in high school is when I started to kind of like pull back on some of the experiences I've had earlier in life and start to have the first creepings of doubt. And I feel like from there, it has moved further and further down the line. And I want to say probably at like my peak moment of feeling like I understood what I'm doing and I feel good about what I'm doing was when I lived in my last job in East Africa. And I want to say that was probably at like a 3.75. And that's when I felt like I was like, I know what I like and I don't feel hindered to not go after things I don't want to go after.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's definitely contextualized by the relationships that you're in. Kind of just like the recency effect of like the things that are most current to you kind of like stick out in your head a little bit more. Yeah.
Okay. So would you say during those early years where you were a 0, would you say that you also had conscious urges to be with someone of the same gender? Were they there, or sometime along the line something activated something in you? So basically, a lot of people. The reason why I'm saying this because a lot of people think homosexual behavior is something that is learned or influenced by people around you
Mm,
or society or movies and stuff, things like that. While some other people argue that it's something that you're born with or you can be born with. You know what I mean? It's natural, like a natural urge, just like everything else. You know, people always ask, when did you find out you
mm,
were gay? You know, like, did you wake up one morning and realize, oh, I like men too, you know? Because I was like, yo, did you wake up one morning to realize, oh, I like women, you know? So that kind of situation. Could you please explain? Did you ever feel like, even when you consider yourself a zero, did you ever feel like perhaps there is some type of urge, even though you may not necessarily be able to compartmentalize that thought of liking somebody of the same sex at that time?
mm. Uh, okay, so I feel like me and you have talked about in the past the importance of someone's like first sexual experience,
Hmm.
and how that can be. I think this is where we disagree. Where I think we don't know if it's very absolute in its formative power of like how you go about the world sexually afterwards, or if it's just forming a first notion, and that notion could either be formative or deformative. Um, so for me, like my first sexual experience, unfortunately, was being sexually assaulted by another man when I was quite young, and I feel like that's what that, and being in a more conservative culture growing up, I feel like that's what kept me at a zero for most of my childhood. I want to say up until like the 8th grade, maybe. Um, and I feel like I feel like I had two very big like pivot points that started to show me that doubts were there, doubts that I just kept suppressed super low throughout the rest of my high school, that just kept me at like a 0 to a 1 until then. But I think the first pivot point was being in health class and being told what sexual assault was, and actually formally putting ideas and knowledge to like what had happened to me, and making more sense of those things was like the first like big pivot. I think the other pivot was at a sleepover that I had with a couple of other dudes, and I think those were the first couple of inklings of like blood rushing to my face and being like, whoa, there's like really weird feelings going on in my body, in certain parts of my body, because of this person I'm sitting next to. And I feel like that was the first inclination of, I was like, wow, I cannot keep myself in check right now. And I feel like that was like the second big pivot point that was really telling to me, which doesn't mean I was then accepting, but I think it just raised my doubt level up quite a bit.
Hmm. Okay. I'm really sorry to hear about the assault that you went through when you were a kid. I really am sorry. And to anyone who's been through any type of abuse, not just sexual, I hope you get help. And you too, Ryan, I hope you're getting help and the healing that you deserve. But one thing I do want to say too is a lot of people claim that a lot of straight people or the world, let's say the world, claim that homosexuality is an effect of molestation. You know, like a lot of people who are gay have been molested or unhealthily exposed to sexual acts by the wrong people, and that definitely unlocks something in them. Would you say that that's the thing with you, the same case with you? Like perhaps the sexual assault that you went through when you were a kid, um, perhaps activated something inside of you, and without that sexual assault, that experience, you would probably still remain at zero. Would you say that?
Mm, I would really love to say no to that question, but unfortunately, I do not have just the counterfactual that tells me what would have happened if it never was part of my experience. I think there are clues that tell me it's not, in terms of, in particular, like what this person looks like, the kind of people, the type of men that I am attracted to. Um, I think also, I want to say I don't know, because that's reality. I can tell you that
Hmm.
my feeling is that I don't think it plays a very important part.
Hmm.
But that thing is definitely like, it is the foundation of my sexual experience. It's a super shitty foundation, very cracked and crumbling. But I don't think it stopped me from building quite an elaborate
Okay. Okay.
other realm of experiences on top of it.
Okay. So you identify as bisexual. You've always well, for the most part, you've identified as bisexual on some type of spectrum of bisexuality. Apart from your very early years where you identified as zero, even though that was out of a suppression, right? Now you come from a very what's the word? You come from New England, right? Where there's not a.
Mm.
Tell me about your background. Like your family dynamic. What's is like? Are you do you come from a liberal? Do you come from a liberal background or conservative background? As gay talked about, LGBT, is that a thing? Are people very educated, aware where you're coming from? Are they educated in these kind of things or not? And how did you manage to maneuver and survive as a bisexual person, a member of the LGBTQ growing up where you're coming from?
Yeah, okay. So to unpack that, New Hampshire is an interesting state that exists amongst all these other blue states that are very similar to it, like Vermont, Maine, Connecticut. They all tend to have like a pretty big like liberal but not well off vibe. New Hampshire is a little bit more interesting because it is a little bit harder to predict. So if you look back at it, the way it votes in past primary elections, like it's almost always on the fringe, and usually will go blue, but not always. So that's just the context. There are places in New Hampshire that are well off. There are great private schools. There are great health institutions. Fortunately, I'm not from any of those areas. So there's definitely a lot of rural pockets that exist in the Northeast that remain very close-minded regardless of the way that the overall population of their state looks.
Mm-hmm.
In my family growing up, which we were very average in our context, I would say my mom used to talk to me about, neither of my parents talked to me about sex, but my mom was smart enough to talk to me about like relationships and how to treat people in relationships and what you should be looking for. And I thought that was always important. And I think coming from a divorced home, that was important for her to talk about. My family is quite separated and divided now, and I would say the ones that stay with my mom in the house that I grew up in are a little bit more open, are now okay, and told me even before in different ways that they were okay with LGBTI matters being around their households. I don't think they necessarily understand it or want to understand it, but they're not against it. And I think other subsets of my family are not for that. So again, like very typical of New Hampshire, a similar thing going on in my family of it's hard to predict. People tend to be on the line. I don't think you can go into New Hampshire and find anybody who could hold this type of conversation, though. I think that would be a lot more rare in the areas that I come from.
Okay. All right. I would like to also add, I think this is just my opinion. I think this is one of those the evidence of the disparities between white people in America and people of color in America because in within the black community, for example, there's a lot more disacceptance, if that's even a word, um, between the black, you know, like if you were to go to the black community is still very homophobic. There's not any type of people, black people don't want to associate themselves with the LGBTQ. I've seen a lot of young black people get kicked out of their homes when their parents notice that they're gay. There's a lot of struggle going on. There's a lot of prostitution, drugs, HIV, violence. Just the list goes on. I feel like
Mm.
even trans people of color, especially trans black people, have it even way worse. So would you say that perhaps this is a situation where you coming from a white background definitely helped in that case, because a lot of white people, I would argue, are way more liberal compared to people of color in this country.
Yeah, this might be controversial to say, but I do feel like the way wealth works in our country is there are ways, I think like old wealth tends to be more conservative and newer wealth tends to be more liberal, and access to newer wealth spaces and opportunities tend to expose you to more liberal ideas. So I would say, like, yeah, I definitely think there's a facet of um, being white. My family, although not coming from much, definitely has more opportunities and access to things around them. And as they've navigated and grown, I'm sure have been exposed to a lot more liberal ideas that make it much, much, much more normal for them to
Hmm.
see LGBT matters in maybe not their everyday life, but at least more frequently than what conservative families might see. Um, so I don't know if it's fair to link uh, acceptance
Hmm.
to access to opportunities, and like social mobility, but that's kind of like where my brain goes in explaining that. And I definitely missed out the context of New Hampshire is super white. Like most, if you Wikipedia any of the towns, it's going to be like 0.0 something percent of people who are not white.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for clearing that. I mean, I've only been black, I'm Nigerian and I don't share the same background as you, so I'm only trying to ask out of curiosity.
Yeah.
You did
Mm.
mention that, correct me if I'm wrong, you did mention that you said your mom talked to you about sex or talked to you about relationships. Which one? Or both?
I want to say my mom talked to me about relationships. I'm blanking on if we ever talked about sex, but we definitely talked about relationships.
So you never
She
got to
had
talk about
a
the
very,
birds and the bees? No, you never got that?
not from my family, no, unfortunately not.
Would
Um, I remember, again, like being raised in a very like split home. I remember when he was very new into the house, one of my mom's boyfriends trying to find out if I had a wet dream or not, and he tried to explain it without using any words I wouldn't know. And I just remember being really confused, being like, "What? What happened? In my what?" And then I feel like after that, no one really tried for a while because they had gone so badly. But I definitely remember. I feel like I did. I definitely asked a few questions in passing. I think I've told you a very iconic joke that I had with my father, where he was trying to talk to me about condoms, and I made a joke about anal, and he got really upset about that. So I feel
Mm.
like it was never a very educational moment. It was always like bits and pieces.
Would you say that you would have appreciated your parents talking to you about these things? Because me, I think these things are extremely important. I know for sure, going back to my family, I would have appreciated my mom, my dad to sit down and actually talk to me and my sisters about these kind of things because it's inevitable. Sexuality is just something that you're going to bump into it eventually. And I feel like not preparing your kids, especially considering the fact that we have so much negative outlets out there, because you don't know who's influencing your kid. I feel like that should be enough incentive for you to actually arm your kids. Let them know like this is a no, this is a yes, blah blah blah. To equip them. It's going to be awkward, it's going to be boring to them, of course, but I feel like eventually as an adult, the kid will look back and appreciate it. Looking back into my life, even though I know I don't have the best relationship with my family, with my parents, I feel like this is one of the things that I would have definitely appreciated. It would have reinforced some type of relationship, some type of bond with my parents, and also would have prepared me for adult life. Because I feel like when it came to sexuality, I was doing a lot of trial and error at a younger age. Doing things I shouldn't have been doing with people I shouldn't have been doing them with. There was a lot of trial and error. It's quite embarrassing, but I feel like that could have been easily prevented if I had somebody, a strong mind behind me who was experienced, direct, honest, and talked sense into me. Would you say that you would have appreciated your parents looking back into your life right now, sitting you down and talking to you about, the birds and the bees or sex or whatnot? Doesn't matter in what context, gay or straight or bisexual, just sex in general, the basics. Would you say you would appreciate it? And would you advocate for that? Sex education starting from the mother and the father or whoever is, raising the kid?
Um, I don't think. Okay, a few things there. Yeah, a big advocate of sex education starting young. Um, I think it needs to start at childhood. I don't think it necessarily needs to come from the parents. Um, I think, although you said like
Well,
without any
well,
context, I think at
n
the end of
n
the day,
not to cut you off, I would argue that it comes with the parents because I feel like the parents will be the safest for the most part. to share with your kids that kind of information. Because a stranger, sorry to mention what happened to you, but a lot of times strangers have used that opportunity to abuse a child, a naive, ignorant kid, take advantage of them, through the, quote unquote, sexual education and whatnot. But you're actually exploiting a kid that doesn't any better. But a parent, I'm not saying that parents don't
Hmm.
abuse the kids sexually either. I'm not saying that. Unfortunately, it does happen, but I feel like the chances are significantly lower if it's coming from a caring mother and father. So that's what I would say. That coming from, I think it's important at a really young age that it comes from the mother, the father, the caretaker, whoever is the primary caretaker of that kid. That's what I'm saying. And not to cut you off, I just wanted to say
Okay.
that before, so I don't lose my train
No.
of thought.
Yeah, I feel. Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, if we're speaking in the form of ideals, I think I think moving away from the parent model is also just helping us move away from the stigmas that sex
Hmm.
has. If it's always treated as this delicate, delicate flower that only your sweet, loving parents could first introduce to you, I think we're still missing the point of sex shouldn't be treated as something so secretive and delicate and fragile that it can only be handled by certain people. Obviously, I hear your concern about strangers coming into the mix, but if we lived in an ideal world where that wasn't the case, I don't think it necessarily always has to come from the parents either. I think it should probably be coming from all sides, just like all forms of education should
Of
be.
course.
Um, yeah, but I feel like by making it something that can only be discussed within the house, it
Hmm.
just goes back to another form of sheltering it up from the outside world, which I think brings us into some of these bad habits that we see.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say is I think my mom talking to me about relationships was really helpful. I think that has taught me a lot more. Um, I think I learned a lot in my own ways. Things that again definitely get you into sticky situations at times, and definitely could have been better if I had more of that education front up. I think the one issue is the thing my parents couldn't have taught me about unless something changes in the way they're educated is the way that I would go about having not safe sex, and that's
Okay.
something that finding out when I'm a young adult, things that I just had no idea even existed and all this shit. I was like, I have what those are the moments where I was like, that's the kind of education that I think people are missing out on is this
Mm.
education how to even have, but also how to have safe and protected sex with people who are not the
Hmm.
opposite gender of you.
Hmm.
Um, and that's why I think LGBTI media can also be just really, really helpful in putting out more of that knowledge. And even today, as a 25-year-old, I still turn to LGBTI media and look at that and go whoa, all these things I still don't know. And it's just because
Hmm.
I went so many years not ever seeing that. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I think that's the one caveat there is heterosexual parents, once they're educated, can really only share with
Hmm.
you the knowledge of so much.
I would say, going back to what I was saying earlier, of course, I think that sex education, relationship talk should come from different varieties, because your parents only know so much. They're humans as well. And of course, if you have heterosexual parents from conservative households, of course, their message is going to be more heteroconformist. You know, I understand that, but I would say I would still stand by. I think your parents should be the primary givers of that kind of knowledge, that first exposure. Of course, when you graduate from there to, let's say elementary school, high school, and all that should be incorporated into the curriculum one way or the other as you get older. But I feel like you should have that baseline from your parents, explain to you in a language that you can understand, and then so that when you get out there, when you go out there, it's not like, whoa, what is this? What is that? Because I feel like that's where a lot of people get lost. A lot of people make a lot of mistakes. Unfortunately, a lot of these mistakes are permanent. And even though your parents didn't talk to you about sex, I still do comment at the fact that your mom talked to you about relationship, because that's something that even some people don't even get, especially people of color, especially people from Africa. I didn't even get that talk at all from my mom, from my dad. We didn't talk about relationships whatsoever. It wasn't a matter of, are you dating somebody, are you doing this, are you being safe, are you, who is this, who is that, that kind of question. It was never there. It was just hush hush, and I think that's extremely dangerous, because as an adult right now, I'm kind of maneuvering through relationships, and it's sort of like, even though I think I'm doing fairly, I feel like I would have been better prepared if my parents had did the preliminary work talking to me about how these things, work in adult life. Even though my parents, they, at the end of the day, they're humans, they're flawed, they have their own issues, but just having that exposure, that first-hand exposure as a kid would have definitely, I feel like, would have given me some type of advantage as an adult, as opposed to me figuring things out through trial and error. That's just what I'll add to that.
Hello again, everyone. This is the end of part one. If you're enjoying this interview so far, please go ahead and head over to part two of this interview to listen to the rest of it. If you're also enjoying my podcast so far, please make sure to subscribe, download, share with your friends and family. If you're new to my YouTube channel, please make sure to subscribe, like, comment, and please hit that bell notification so that anytime I upload a video, you'll be the very first to be notified. See you in part two.